Hi everybody, this is Andy Bochman from the Idaho National Lab. As you can see, I'm on video, and that wasn't my intent. I was hoping to be there with you all, and couldn't make it, had a family emergency, had to fly home from DC directly. So nevertheless, I put together a talk for you today, and I want to give it to you, and hopefully it's on a big screen, or you can see it later on a monitor, and I hope to make this worth your while. So enough of that background stuff. Thanks for welcoming me into this cybersecurity summit. And without further delay, let's go into the talk, okay? All right, so there's going to be 4 parts to it. Maybe a little bit of intro. I want to talk to you about a methodology some of you may have heard about, consequence-driven cyber-informed engineering. From now on, I'll try to say CCE to save time. And then the main thrust of this talk is the third bullet down, this new national strategy called cyber-informed engineering, which is related to CCE. I'll call it CIE, and I'll try to explain the differences and how they might make a difference in your world. And lastly, I have been pivoting not to remove myself from the cybersecurity world, but to add climate physical risk, climate resilience to grid and other infrastructures of late, and I'm gonna leave on with a couple notes on that. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's just keep going. Sorry, I have to move myself around a little bit. This is just background for those of you who we haven't met yet. There's a book on CCE. I'll just give you some orientation. The second thing on the lower left-hand corner is a NARUC primer on cybersecurity. They was a project around 10 years ago that I started to contribute to. Some of you may have come across it either in our trainings or in other ways. I do training for NARUC too across the country, mainly in person before the pandemic, mainly virtual during the pandemic, and I think it's coming back on to be an in-person thing. So, but that book was basically intended to say, okay, for those of you who don't have a background in cyber, here are some things that it behooves you to know, and here are some questions in the appendix that were you to ask these of the utilities that you care about, they would potentially prompt interesting and helpful answers from them. So if you haven't seen that yet, it's in several different versions. Miles Keogh is the lead author. It's really decent for cybersecurity matters. It's not everything you need, but it's something, and it's fairly lightweight. The final 2 articles that I'm showing down here on the bottom row on the intro slide are just to let you know, as I said, I'm starting to move from pure cyber background and focus into things that have to do with the energy transition, climate resilience, etc. And by the way, the row across the top is just some of the places that I've worked to get a feeling for where I've been. That's not comprehensive, but that's some of the biggies. All right, in every talk that I've been giving recently, and I would have done this if I was in person there with you guys too, I begin with this triangle of risks that grid managers, balancers, reliability professionals, and utility folks, that they're all juggling at the same time. There's other balls too, but man, I gotta keep it somehow constrained. I'll start with climate physical at the top. You've already heard me saying that that's an area I'm getting into. We'll finish with something on that. But you could say that the climate, the concerns about what's happening as we heat the atmosphere, which then heats the oceans and causes global weirding, or the new phenomena we're seeing in terms of extreme heat, extreme cold, sea level rise, storm surge, drought, blah, 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 that has begot the energy transition. Energy transition, shorthand for saying new wind, big wind farms, solar farms, storage, and potentially the electrification of all kinds of things that used to burn fossil fuels, and evolving the fleets to be electrified, fleets of regular people's cars and trucks and things like that. So you take the climate physical risks, which are causing an impact, take the uncertainties and strange juggling acts going on with the energy transition, and then add cyber to that on the lower left-hand corner. The fact that much of the new equipment that's being deployed as part of the energy transition comes from companies that really have very little background in cybersecurity. Now, I'm not saying that the old guard grid equipment suppliers are expert at cybersecurity and are doing a bang-up job, everybody's got issues. But some of them have a longer track record and have had more time to learn and evolve their products in ways that are helpful. Where some of the new entries in the energy transition space, the distributed energy renewables space, they have even less experience, and so they have further to go. Take all three of these things and you've got big problems. But wait, I can make it even more problematic. And that's to when I remind people that, I've got to put myself somewhere again, that if you just take care of one sector, here I'll overlay onto the grid itself. If you just take one sector, like your electric utility, your distribution utilities, the IOUs, and try to ensure that they're doing a good job in the cyberspace. But you forget that absent rock-solid communications, water, wastewater treatment, and water management, transportation, and including the transportation of fuels, that you're really not protecting what it is you're trying to protect, or you're not doing it fully anyway. And so all three of these major forces in the blue across not just the electric sector, but the other interdependent sectors, that's really the scale, that's the scope of the challenge. And it's a tough one. And we're trying to help people at least come to grips with it and maybe do something constructive. So CCE, this is the methodology that begat, or at least was developed in parallel with the one that I'm going to talk to once I get past the next couple slides. This is based on the premise, developed initially at Idaho National Lab, and now it's starting to spread through other parts of the Department of Energy complex and the sector of owner-operators. And also we do this with the military too. You have a quote here from Michael Hayden, and it nicely captures the spirit of CCE as a methodology. He says, they're going to get in. So stop pretending that you're going to keep the adversaries out, and start thinking about what kind of experience you want them to have when they've gained access to your systems. And we show in the book and in other documents and materials that there are some really constructive engineering-based things, as opposed to just throwing more firewalls at something, more software protections, that there are some real tangible, demonstrable things an electric utility and some of those others can do to make themselves a much harder target. So we begin with the assumption in a CCE engagement, we assume access. They're already in. We don't spend any time going, are we keeping them out? Can we keep them out? The book that came out in the beginning of last year, it's available. It's in different formats if you want to get it, but it both gives you really good background on why we need to make this thing when pure cybersecurity tools, technologies, techniques, and regulations aren't getting the job done, at least not enough to our satisfaction, and then breaks down the methodology into pieces that regular people can understand. Although, admittedly, parts of the book do get a little bit technical. Don't want to pretend. Okay, I'm putting myself over phase 4. Just letting you know it is 4 pieces. You don't need to memorize these. I just want to give you a sense that it's setting the table, setting the stage for CIE, which we're about to get to. And so phase 1 is called consequence prioritization. Shortest way to say it is, it means you know you can't protect everything. Don't even try. You don't have enough money. You don't have enough time. You don't have enough people. So identify the things that matter most, the assets, the functions that those assets support, and in phase 2, the different systems, people, process, and technologies that enable those functions, and make sure you focus on the ones that really matter the most to a given entity. Don't waste your time on things that are on the periphery. Phase 3 is targeting. That's where we take someone who is adept, possibly because they had some non-defensive background in their cyber experience, and their job is to build the kill chains or the recipes or the dance steps that ultimately, when packaged as a digital payload, could take out a company. In fact, we begin by asking the C-suite, how would you kill your company? Have you thought about it? What would you aim for in terms of your key functions or your key assets? And then we work through the phases with them. By the time we've finished with phase 3, and we've developed some targeted attacks that would really take out an electric utility for an unacceptable amount of time, and it could be, like I said, other sectors too, Phase 4, informed by that knowledge, is about developing the engineered mitigations and protections that would prevent the adversary from being able to do that attack. And by the way, since we do this with the entity and not to them, and they actually play a very big role in helping develop the scenarios that get us to that last stage, it's really something that has a lot of buy-in. And the last stage is briefing the C-suite. Here were your biggest weak points, and here are some things that you can do to really shore yourself up and put yourself in a better position. This is good for you, the electric utility, water utility. This is good for your regulators because you can show them these things, and they're easier to understand than standard cybersecurity defenses. They're actually even good for your insurers. Insurers, we're working with insurance and reinsurance firms on both sides of the Atlantic, and they seem to be really buying into this process too. Again, because it's more demonstrable, it's easier to understand and to show that you've done something that can really improve your cybersecurity posture. All right, more on that later if you want. And I don't mean later in this talk, I mean if you want to go into more detail on it, we'd be happy to give you a briefing on it. Okay, so now CIE, Cyber Informed Engineering. I'll say this to differentiate it from the former one, and that is that CCE is more about organizations. How do you approach a critical infrastructure, owner-operator organization, identify its greatest weaknesses, how would you kill your mission, how would you kill your primary functions, and then helping make them more solid. Whereas CIE aims more for engineers, people that design things, so emphasis on things, products, systems, and to try to ensure that, or to try to really begin making it so that we are, perhaps you've heard the phrase, baking security in more often than bolting it on after the fact. So the vision of this thing is that engineers, these aren't even cybersecurity people, right? But they know enough that when they design something, and I'll get to a slide on this, they're designing it because in a certain way, because they know that that system or that product is going to spend its entire life, once deployed, in a cyber contested world. And they don't want it to be constantly getting knocked over, knocked down, taken over, etc. So that's the idea. So you can see that we're targeting really the engineering community, among others, and not just doing the standard cybersecurity dance. The document that I'm covering, that I'll now uncover, was published earlier this year, signed by the Secretary of the Department of Energy, and introducing CIE as a national strategy for the nation. And we're helping roll it out now with universities, with engineering firms, with other folks across the whole landscape. Okay. Let's do this. You'll see I'm going to try to put myself someplace again. I got to build these slides so that there's just a natural gap where I can just leave myself, you know? I apologize. I'm getting there. The engineering life cycle. In simple form, if you follow this U-shaped diagram around from the upper left, from the concept, the initial concept, you know, somebody sketching an idea on a napkin, perhaps over drinks. I've been there for that, and I've seen that napkin sketch get all the way through to something that you can buy, that is deployed in the field and electric utilities, and is helping with their cybersecurity challenges. Anyway, so all the way from the very first cradle aspect of developing a product or a system, coming around the ring through requirements and architecture, more detailed design and development, integration with what it needs to integrate with to bring the pieces together, T&E, and ultimately getting it out there into the world so that it can do its job. This is the traditional engineering life cycle. And what I'm going to show, if I can click to the next slide, is that with CIE, we have taken, looks like I have to go back because I got to explain on the right-hand side that of all those steps, that really the cybersecurity aspect, OT being operational technology, doesn't enter the picture until really near the very end. And when you do that, which is what we do now, it's always more expensive and less effective and a pain in the butt. And that's the whole cybersecurity industry. And I don't mean to be overly harsh to the people that are delivering services or delivering products. We definitely need them, at least up until we are able to change the entire engineering mindset. And even then, we'll still need them. It's just that we may need them a little bit less, or we may need them to do some other things around the edges that right now they have to protect absolutely everything, and it is not easy. So again, this is the way things are today, with cybersecurity entering the scene at a relatively late stage, which is hard for everybody, and then transitioning to a happier time, when from the very beginning down through the middle and at the very end, we've made a product that is just inherently more secure, harder for adversaries to take advantage of. In the document that I showed you the cover of, it has the strategies broken down into 5 pillars. And so we have awareness, which is just like letting people know that this thing exists. So that's kind of what I'm doing now. I'm barely scratching on education, but we are building training materials and experiences for folks and younger folks in STEM programs, and folks in universities and in engineering companies, to be able to have a better feel for how this can be implemented. And part of how it'll be implemented will be using various tools that can assist and complement the process. That's the development pillar. And lastly, I think this idea of these two aspects at the end just address sort of the present and the future. By the way, there's a URL down at the bottom. You can see to get more detail on this. The fact is that everything that's running the grid now in Texas and elsewhere, that's legacy. That's the fleet. That's our current infrastructure. And some of these principles apply to that. A lot of them do. It's just that, and so we'll describe those. It's just that it's more optimal in that last pillar. If you can say, okay, we're going to build something new now from scratch, and now let's do that with CIE principles in hand, and really go from the very beginning to the thing that gets deployed and delivered with something that is inherently more secure and a tougher target for adversaries. So that's it. That's the 5 pillars, and my colleagues at Idaho National Lab and the Department of Energy and other labs and all those other companies I've mentioned and some more are all working on this right now. Hopefully it'll come to a theater near you sometime soon. I'll just give you 1 or 2 of the principles, maybe 2 of the several different design principles in the process. One is hearkening back to CCE and focusing on consequence, beginning with the worst things that can happen and making sure that you target taking them out before you get to things that are less consequential. So what are the disasters? What are the worst things that could happen? And if I'm successful, can I make these things just be a pain but not a nightmare? And so we evaluate impact with different types of categories you can see around this ring. And I won't read them all off, but you can weight these things depending on the type of company that you're talking about, the type of function they are, even the region that they're in and the loads they serve. And so once we develop that, we start to get a sense for what the impacts are. That's how we develop our scenarios and then go after them in the subsequent phases. And is that it? I think maybe that's it for, yeah, looks like I jumped to the very end. So that's the example principle I wanted to run by you. I had another one. It had more to do with, and here I'll flip to this so you're not staring at that. It had more to do with making sure that you police yourself so that material that's online that could tell an adversary about you, like think LinkedIn, all the stuff it reveals about your personnel and who's in charge of what. And when you go to conferences, who's describing their problems and their solutions in detail. Could be the utility itself, could be one of their many service or product providers that are using them as an example. Sometimes we even see blueprints and diagrams online. It's just way too much detail, makes the adversary's job really easy. That's the whole open source Intel thing. And we begin actually every C engagement by looking at those things first to go to school super fast. So I said I'd bring it on home with a little bit of a description of climate issues. And so here you see the ring of CCE, which we've just gone through, and then into CIE. And I just wanted to say that we've taken pieces of that, like phase 1, focusing on the things that matter most by consequence. And phase 4 mitigations and protections, in this case, engineered resilience measures and adaptation, functional adaptation measures. The things that are in between them are different because on the left side, we're talking about sentient human adversaries coming at us by digital means from any distance. On the right-hand side, in phase 2, we're talking about overlaying climate models that give us some sense of what's coming at us and when and where. And then they don't claim, by the way, to be perfectly predictive. They do project likely future scenarios, 5, 10, 20 years in the future, so that we can make plans and perhaps run some exercises and change some things before those things hit us in full force. And yes, I am recalling and remembering that I'm talking to Texas, thinking about as everybody continues to harken back to February of last year and the freeze. And yeah, that's unexpected, but it's not completely unexpected. You'll hear folks talking about this storm or this heat wave, this flood, this drought is unprecedented. And I'm hearing that term so much now that it's starting to lose its impact, its sting, because you can tell things are changing. Everyone can. And so you probably want to get out ahead of them, especially if your job is as important as doing overwatch on critical energy and other infrastructures. Get out in front of it. And if you want to talk more about the models, the global climate models maintained at national labs and NOAA and NCAR in Boulder, I'm going to be trying to demystify those a little bit for folks. Again, like with cyber, not so that they become expert. They don't need to become expert. They have other things to do, but so that they can feel more comfortable understanding how to use those things and know what they can do and what they can't do, what they tell you, what they're not telling you, etc. So that's it on that slide. And yeah, it looks like I didn't get the sequence quite right, but let's do this too. So we're talking about the different events that are coming. You've heard me reference them. You can see the freeze in there that I'm partially covering up. It's just undeniable that these things are happening. Sometimes it gets political. People don't want to say the word global warming, so I say global weirding as I did earlier. It's just the fact that you got to acknowledge something's going on. And if your job is one to be responsible for infrastructure and everything infrastructure does, like serve cities and serve regions and protect public health and national security, you got to be doing something now and not waiting for the effects to arrive. Got to be proactive, not solely reactive. Recently at the Midwest Reliability Organization in St. Paul, Minnesota, they asked me to do a keynote presentation on this topic. And so we called it Physical Security 2.0, not your grandfather's or your grandmother's physical security. You know, right? Because there's always cybersecurity is one thing. We've always known we have these cousins in physical security. And they do overlap a bit, especially as the latter gets more automated and uses more computers and sensors. But still, they're rather different professions. And the adversaries they're protecting against are quite different. With cyber, again, the sentient human adversary coming from afar by digital means. With physical security, we're talking about people actually coming at you, coming at your assets in person, sometimes with weapons and tools to wreak havoc on you. And we've always used the shorthand for that. Gates, guards, and guns are what will keep those bad actors at bay. When I led off the talk at MRO, I showed them this picture. I said, these things are all as important as ever. Only thing is they don't do anything, hardly anything. I don't think they do anything for floods, for droughts, for massive heat waves or heat domes, and the list of the cast of characters that are starting to impact infrastructure around the United States and around the world. I'm saying we need to do something different, that's all. And I think this might be my last content slide. Again, I'll move myself out of the fray, out of the picture one last time. And this is something it might behoove you to know about. Maybe you've heard some whispers already. But as climate concerns have escalated over the last few years as the impacts have grown and become more obvious, it seems like the nation and maybe the world's appetite, or at least tolerance for nuclear energy, including new forms which appear to be safer, more affordable, easier to get through the NRC. Once they happen once, then you have the same design and you can keep building and deploying that same design with its certification. seems like there's an appetite for this now. And so the Idaho National Lab and several other, well, lots of other places are working this issue about bringing some new designs to life. Yes, we are applying CIE to the new designs, and with the idea that we can deploy them sometime soon and begin to replace, because like I said, with the energy transition, I didn't go into it in detail, but we're shutting down baseload coal and in some cases making it harder to build baseload gas, and saying, oh, we'll deploy more renewables and that'll make up the difference in margin, but it's not really doing it. That's why we have headlines that say all the time now, will California make it through the summer? Will Texas make it through the summer? Will different folks make it through the winter? I would posit that running the grid should be the most conservative thing that we do just about, and we shouldn't play around. We got to manage it like adults and have real comfortable margins for baseload that we know that they can take a hit, a major hit, and still just be fine. And there shouldn't be headlines like the ones that I was just paraphrasing. So one of the main things that seems really exciting to me, and maybe it is to you, it is to others for sure, is the idea of taking coal plants that have either been shuttered recently or are set to close, and converting them into small modular reactor sites. You think I could say that? I say it enough. SMRs of comparable size. And the reason for this, and I've been doing this business case in other venues, is fivefold. One is, as I said, we need it for reliability of the grid. Right now we're playing too fast and loose with reliability, and it's just undercutting our confidence that we even know what we're doing in some cases. The NERC Summer Reliability Report painted the entire West orange and painted the stripe up and down the center of the continent where you live and where I live up in Milwaukee, red. Like if there's bad heat and things coming this summer, and by the way, it already passed and it didn't really happen, but it's what it looked like could happen, there could be some real problems. So it shouldn't, again, we shouldn't be seeing stuff like that. There's other things which I'll skip over quickly, like if you convert a coal plant in a town to a small modular reactor plant, you get to keep all the jobs. Some require retraining, some require recertification, but you get to keep them all. So the town gets its tax base, and that's something you don't get to get if you convert to some comparable amount of wind and solar and deploy that somewhere else. Transmission. I may be overstating it, but I think not by too much when I say we can't build transmission in this country anymore. We just spend years and decades fighting over it, because we allow all the opinions to be expressed. I'm not against that, but the unhappy outcome is that we can't build it. And so that when we try to put something out in the middle of some big open space, big wind and big solar, if we don't have the ability to hook it up to transmission, then there was really no point in doing that. The beauty of coal to nuclear conversion is that the transmission lines terminate at a site that's already been certified, blessed, permitted is the word I'm going for electricity generation. It's usually near water, which we need for cooling and steam. And we got a substation, we got to change some things in there, but think about how much is already there for us. It's just fantastic instead of trying to build on a greenfield somewhere else. That's the transmission part, right? Public perception is changing. A recent Pew report says that as climate concerns grow, fear of and resistance to nuclear power, new nuclear designs are on the way out. And then not to be too hard on the renewable people, if you are able to have a clean baseload generation that's really solid and reliable, then you can go crazy and put all kinds of wind and solar on top of it, knowing that as the wind ebbs and flows and the sun rises and falls, that you're going to have a stable grid. And so it's actually good for that community as well. Last up on this slide is first up. The first one looks like it's going to be in Kemmerer, Wyoming, a couple hours southeast of Idaho Falls where my lab is. And there's just a picture here of the coal plant that's there now. I think it's closed or closing. And the intent is to be up and running by 2029. That's very ambitious. It may take longer. But once we get a rhythm going with coal to nuclear conversion in the form of small modular reactors, we might go surprisingly fast. A recent report came out from DOE identifying 300 sites and tons of gigawatts of power that could be converted to something that is no longer producing carbon emissions and is really helping stabilize the grid. How do you like that? That's it. And thank you, Texas. This is my town, Milwaukee. I adopted it a couple years ago when I moved from Boston. I like it. It's very manufacturing centric. And you probably think it's a little cold in the winter. You might be right. But hey, you guys have cold sometimes too, right? There's two ways to reach me, by my work email and by my Twitter handle. And I'll be ready to take your questions. I should be logging in or already logged on via Zoom. And so I hope this was okay for you. Sorry if the slides were a little funny, and that the rest of the conference goes well for you too. Okay? Thanks very much. Bye.